One of our newer initiatives is this Climate Council. This is essentially a group of practitioners, thought leaders in their fields who serve as a sort of research and development arm for the Institute. So while we're based in New York City, we are always looking to learn from other places around the world and really sort of funnel those learnings back to Van Alen. And so just this past year, we founded the Climate Council as an attempt to really look to identify what are the key issues and help to frame some of the issues around climate change, which is an area that we're increasingly taking on as an institute, as you saw through Jessica's work around our Keeping Current. And so what's really interesting about the Climate Council is that we're thinking beyond just the issues that designers are involved in around rising sea levels and adaptation of coastal communities. What are the ways in which designers can participate in addressing other climate change related issues? So really being at the forefront of some of those conversations and inserting design really intentionally in those conversations. Another important aspect of the group is really to sort of educate designers about where they fit into this, to addressing these issues. So again, kind of funneling those learnings back to the design community and having them understand that beyond just rising sea levels, there is a place for them to participate in this conversation. And then also educate communities about what the function of design is, to help them sort of self-identify, what are the issues and how can design, be of service to that. And then lastly, really to break down the sort of urban-rural dichotomy. So thinking about issues of climate change, which really don't discriminate and sort of cross those boundaries, thinking about and taking a more holistic and systems thinking approach to investigating some of those issues. I think the next one is you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll stand up and maybe walk around a little bit. That's okay. And many of you may have heard of or have been referencing Rebuild by Design. One of these moments, I think, in our design profession where we can really collide with interdisciplinary folks, academics, folks on the ground to really think again about these systems approaches. Van Alen supported and drove Rebuild by Design and a few other really, I think, powerful examples of the sort of idea of getting multiple views around systems approaches, which is, I think, why this Climate Council specifically, I think, is so powerful. There's design expertise, but also meeting people on the ground, talking with academics who are so, dedicate their lives to these issues and know them better than anybody. And really in that spirit is where we sort of jump off. And, with the idea of how do we sort of find the impacts that really connect our design community with our ever-changing environments and our climate emergency, food started to emerge as maybe a kind of theme or a kind of element to bind that. If you start with Maslow, hierarchy of needs, it's sort of front and center. Water, food, rest, warmth, these sort of basic needs that oftentimes we forget about as just being our sort of first principles when we approach places and people. I often reference Jo De Silva's work from Europe. She's fantastic, been doing work around the world around urban systems. She's broken out 3 types of urban systems: networked, knowledged, and institutional. And I love that in the sort of basic infrastructure that we need to bind and connect our communities, food's right there. Right? Food, water, shelter, sanitation, waste management. These are the things that we often forget about when we're thinking about our kind of interdisciplinary design teams. We spend a lot of time finding energy and water experts. When's the last time you brought a food expert onto your interdisciplinary team to really think about that as a basic infrastructure? And also the idea that these food systems connect almost every part of these other parts of infrastructure, right? Interrelationships with energy and water, sanitation, health, go down the list, right? It's really a kind of a system that really influences and connected to all other systems. And you're not meant to read all of this, but just again, it's not just a sort of physical set of implications or policy implications, economic implications. The video, I think, did a good job to break that down. But this interconnectedness of food and visiting and sort of understanding food as a system, we thought was a really amazing place to start. So again, the sort of food supply chain production through consumption, I mean, we sort of understand the more traditional kind of pathways for food, but all of these sort of vulnerabilities have been really highlighted, and there's just a fragility in the system right now, and climate change is making it worse. All sorts of environmental issues, temperature changes, soil degradation, all sorts of concerns about resources available, changing food habits, processing, and the sort of disconnection between the food growers and what happens when it leaves the farm. These sort of all sorts of broken social systems with the way our farmers and our communities are engaging each other, and migrant workers, etc. We'll touch a little bit on that. Obviously distribution and the impacts on climate associated with distribution, all sorts of disincentivized structures, health crises. Again, the video did a really good job of this, and really importantly, understanding our most vulnerable populations and how our sort of more traditional systems haven't really been in support of them and their issues. And, you know, obviously there's been a lot of really amazing design interventions in and around food. Of course, a lot of, I think, talk about sort of meeting food where it has been growing through things like agrivillages, agritourism, sort of bringing maybe more of the urban to the rural, and also the converse. A lot more of these sort of, I would call, decentralized typologies of maybe bringing food more toward the people that they're serving them through things like food hubs, urban farming, farmers markets, community gardens. I mean, these are really amazing interventions, but I think the Climate Council was really trying to ask the question of where are these vulnerabilities, where can designers intervene to make a difference, and I think in that spirit is where we sort of jumped off.
So we have some photos from these trips. So what's interesting is our kind of approach to studying a system. I think that's a unique challenge that we undertook. So the format of the Climate Council is two 3-day trips that are comprised of site visits, roundtable conversations, sort of interacting with a range of different stakeholders that comprise the system, in this case the food system. What really struck me in designing this program, you know, the attempt is really to create the conditions for this council to sort of ideate and again identify where are the vulnerabilities, where are the possibilities for intervention. You know, I was reaching out to small-scale artisanal farmers in the middle of the Central Valley in California that are really struggling as a result of, you know, drought or other conditions as, you know, stemming from climate change, and they were really excited about the opportunity to meet and to talk with the Climate Council. This was really struck me that you know, they're so sort of desperate for sort of solutions and thinking innovatively about how to tackle some of these problems. They immediately saw the value of bringing a different discipline to the table to think about that. So essentially, you know, what we did was we tried to sort of delve into the complex interplay of structural, social, and environmental sort of underpinnings of the food system through elevating the voices of different people. Again, you had the farmer themselves, so we're looking at different scales of farming. We looked at small, like 20-acre artisanal farming operations, all the way up to 100,000 plus acres, you know, huge industrial farming operations. We talked to, we went to the Merced Food Bank, so we talked about food insecurity and sort of the inherent contradiction of having an extremely food insecure you know, community in the heart of the breadbasket. We went and talked to a panel of farm workers and farm laborers and some of the challenges they have, you know, in the absence of a connected transportation system, and you know, for example, getting them from their houses to the farms. You know, and we had work sessions and roundtables with various people along the way. So we were looking both at the sort of advanced technologies to optimize food production for a growing global population, but really focusing on the experiences and the narratives and the social dimension of the food system as a means to really understand and unpack some of the issues at play. And I think what really astounded us, and this is something Steven will speak to, was the extent to which it was relatively siloed, especially in the case of the, you know, agricultural industry in Central Valley. We took our learnings after looking at land-based food systems. We continued that conversation in the Seattle region. So we went from California to Washington's coast to look at at the effects of climate change on seafood and seafood production. And we did a similar type of program in which we, again, looked at to talk to the producer, the distributor, the consumer, and sort of understand all the different pieces that comprise the system. So on that note, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, and Stacey and her team did an amazing job with the itinerary. I mean, it was done till midnight, multiple days, and the attitude of some of these experts, fishers, distributors, was so welcoming, and yeah, to your point, they were so interested in having conversations about those intersections, and I think you're going to see some outcomes and some summaries, but there was a lot of relationships that were formed just by the council themselves that I think really were powerful. So, you know, the council sort of reflected on the Central Valley trips and the Seattle trip, and you know, through some sort of collisions of ideas, summarized some outcomes into 4 sort of themes. These have been written up and are on Van Alen's website in more detail. This deck will be available, but you know, obviously there's not a one size, one sort of silver bullet to break down all the issues of the food systems, but as far as design interventions that could really be impactful, these themes really resonated. And we've heard story after story of some of the sort of breakdowns of the system because of people's perceptions and or the connections with the food they eat. I don't think this is a novel idea generally, but it was just amplified through all the conversations that we've had. The sort of ugly food movement, so much food gets discarded because it doesn't look like the types of carrots that you maybe want to eat. Those are delicious looking carrots to many people that don't know. We heard stories of actually melons that were actually harvested with more care, didn't have as much water content as traditional melons, were actually more nutritious, but didn't look like the melons that were typically in stores, and truckloads of melons got discarded because they thought they were just you know, rejects, basically, right? And you know, who are the messengers that can amplify this? Who are the, you know, how do we connect in the schools to really educate and connect more with people's perception of food? I think that's a really important one, and that's why it's first. We heard all of these stories about missed opportunities because there was nobody to connect. And we saw some of that in real time. Food that was getting thrown away next to food deserts. Alternative industries that could be formed just by asking a few questions about what, you know, you maybe as a small artisanal farmer don't have the resources to take to the next step of production, but someone right next door maybe could, and find those, again, those co-benefits of alternative industry. We love this crop mobster. It's kind of social media, storytellers, connectors, folks that find that sort of middle space for these alternative industries. And there is so much waste in the system that finding those alternative economies is just a critical outcome that I think designers could really influence. Stacey touched briefly on some of the concerns of migrant workers, day workers that are giving up so much to commute to these farms, are finding really difficult living situations. Obviously, our political environment is making life very difficult for them in a lot of different ways. There are so many opportunities to create design interventions for co-location, for better transportation mobility, even down to the scissors and some of the shears that they use haven't been designed for certain, you know, for females that are in, or elderly perhaps, and just little industrial design interventions could extend hours and really change their lives in so many different ways. And also the idea of sort of reconnecting with the culture of the food that is around us and listening to the stories that people tell about what food means to them. We had an amazing meal with Chef Sato. The entire meal was essentially made up of what's called trash fish. Trash fish is basically the bycatch of another sort of primary fish, and because there's no one there to sort of take the time to separate it, it often just gets thrown away, and this fish is delicious. And Chef Sato spent the night talking to us about his connections with his family, food, and sustainable interventions to really find those sort of missed opportunities and waste streams and connect to people and make them really powerful stories in the community. And of course, EcoDistricts, I think, is an amazing forum to uncover some of these opportunities. It's listed in the protocol under health and well-being, you know, in the sort of connections with the imperatives, food systems, objectives. Are there healthy and affordable fresh food? Is food production in the district, right? I think those are two really important challenges, but I would ask us all, like, how are we thinking about food as a sort of connector to all of these different themes? Oftentimes when we do community or comprehensive planning, we take a kind of single perspective and sort of turn it to 11, right? Like, what would the plan look like if we were designing completely around open space or programmatic adjacency or carbon? How rarely do we actually turn food to 11 and say, let's think about communities, spaces, connections around food? And I think if we did more of that through the EcoDistricts or similar protocols, we'd see all of these co-benefits emerge of health, of resource, of community, and I think it's really powerful. Do you want to say briefly about next steps?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, in keeping with the sort of mandate of the council, which is to, you know, serve as sort of a research and development arm for Van Alen, I think the intention now is to bring all this research and these learnings back to New York. And so we're going to be designing and convening and bringing multiple stakeholders to the table to sort of dig into some of these principal findings and sort of continue to unpack some of those thematic areas that we discovered through these various trips that we took. So stay tuned for more information on that.
And you know, I think just also in the engagement process, there's so many great examples of connecting people to food. Farmers markets are an amazing opportunity to sort of have an audience. You can engage them not only around food, but around community. There's so many great examples of using the farmers market to say, how did you get here? What's important to you? How to use this space when the farmers market isn't there? Food is a really great connector. Many of you may know this event, Feast on the Street in Phoenix. I think it's a quarter mile, maybe a half a mile of connected table, bringing people together, art and community around food. Many of you local know the story of Conflict's Kitchen, a really powerful entity that brings people together around global conflict and serves food around conflicts the U.S. has with other entities in the world. But bringing people together around food and discussing issues, I think, is a really powerful notion. And some work we're doing on Joe Louis Greenway in Detroit about food as a kind of connector for almost all of our community engagement, where the stories of the local food and the connections to local food are really a kind of hook, not only to get there, but a hook in the messages of why it's really important to be local, connected with your communities, and tell your stories. We're out of time, but if you don't know what this is, find me later. We ate this and enjoyed it. So, yeah.
No, I'll just say, if you have questions about the Climate Council or interested in learning more, you can ask myself, Steven, and we also have Barbara Wilkes from the Climate Council as well, who's joining us here at EcoDistricts. So I'm happy to share more information about that.
Thank you all.